we begin the day with the Democratic Party's new would-be White House duo. This week, Vice President Kamala Harris announced the most important decision in her campaign to become the next U.S. president in November, the person who will be her vice presidential running mate. His name is Tim Walz, and he is governor of the state of Minnesota. Walz was in the group of candidates, but he was not reported to be in the core group of finalists, which were Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro and Arizona Senator Mark Kelly. Well, that changed last weekend as Harris began making her decision. What was it about Walz that gave him the winning edge? In a moment, I'll ask another man from Minnesota what he thinks. But first, this report on the Harris-Walz ticket for the White House.
Tim has an incredible record as governor of the great state of Minnesota. And to those who know him best, Tim is more than a governor. To his wife, Gwen, he is a husband. To his kids, Hope and Gus, he is dad. To his fellow veterans, he is Sergeant Major Walz. To the people of southern Minnesota, for 12 years, he was a congressman. To his former high school students, he was Mr. Walz. And to his former high school football players, he was Coach. Coach. And in 90 days, the nation will know Coach Walz by a new title, Vice President of the United States of America.
Well, my first guest tonight is, like Tim Walz, a man who calls Minnesota home, and unlike Tim Walz, a man whose political home used to be the Republican Party. Richard Painter served as the chief White House ethics lawyer under U.S. President George W. Bush. He sued Donald Trump for ethics violations in 2017 and left the GOP 1 year later. Mr. Painter joins me tonight from Yarmouthport in Massachusetts. Mr. Painter, it's good to see you again. There's a lot going on, a lot to talk about. Kamala Harris has chosen Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her VP running mate. Tell me, what does a fellow Minnesotan, what does he have to say about that?
Well, Tim Walz has been governor of Minnesota for 6 years. I don't always agree with him. I'm a former Republican, and I share many of the views of the Republican Party before Donald Trump rose to power. But Tim Walz represented one of the more conservative districts in Minnesota for 12 years in the United States Congress as a Democrat. And this is a district that the Republicans won in the last election by 11 percentage points, a very conservative first congressional district in Minnesota. So Tim Walz historically is by no means a radical leftist. When he became governor of Minnesota, with the support of the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, which now controls both houses of the state legislature, he did help shepherd through some legislation which could be viewed as quite progressive. But that being said, Tim Walz is a political realist, and he understands that what gets done is what gets done not just at the will of the president or the vice president of the United States, but also the will of Congress. And he's been in Congress for 12 years, and I would think that he could be quite effective as a vice president for Kamala Harris.
Mr. Painter, do you agree that Tim Walz will become the push that undecided voters in battleground states need to cast their vote for Kamala Harris?
Well, the advantage of Kamala Harris choosing Tim Walz, he is a Midwesterner. He's originally from Nebraska, but has lived in Minnesota for many decades. His wife's from Minnesota, and he's represented this state, Minnesota, and also been governor. We need a Midwesterner in the White House. Certainly the president, Kamala Harris, if she does get elected president, she's from San Francisco, and that's fine. But we also need a Midwesterner close to the positions of power in the United States. And vice president is very, very good. That's going to appeal to Midwesterners who often feel left out, particularly with the Democratic Party, which has a lot of strength in the East Coast and the West Coast, but not so much in the Midwest outside of the very large cities.
Tim Walz, he was governor in 2020 when the George Floyd riots took place. Republicans, they've accused him of waiting too long to call in the National Guard to protect public buildings and businesses. They are also putting him in the progressive left category of those who want to defund police departments. You posted something on X that caught my attention. I want to pull that up for our viewers to see. You posted, "No, Tim Walz is not anti-police. Only an idiot would want to abolish the police or defund the police. There are a few idiots in Minnesota, but Tim Walz is not one of them. He wants to reform the police. We can and must fight racism, corruption, and crime at the same time." I hear what you're saying, Mr. Painter, but do you see this as the political Achilles heel of Tim Walz that Donald Trump will target?
Well, of course, Donald Trump is going to target Tim Walz for anything he can. But there's simply no evidence that Tim Walz wants to abolish the police or defund the police. Now, I would like to see more funding of police in Minnesota than we presently have. The city of Minneapolis is definitely run by a bunch of leftists who have interfered with the work of the Minneapolis Police Department. Now, that being said, the police officer who murdered George Floyd was a violent racist and belongs in prison. We need to support the police. We also need to fight racism in policing and call for police reform. And Governor Walz has never, ever called for defunding the police or abolishing the police. That's a very, very small group of people, extreme left-wingers, who often don't even vote for the Democrats, that are looking for socialists or Marxists or somebody else to support. So, of course, he'll also be accused of that, but there's just no evidence to back that up.
Do you think that we will see a televised debate between the vice presidential candidates, Tim Walz and J.D. Vance? Do you think we should see one?
We certainly should see one. I think all the candidates need to debate, and Donald Trump needs to debate Kamala Harris, and not just insist that the debate be on Fox News. One of the major networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, could host the debate. There needs to be several debates with the presidential candidates and the vice presidential candidates so the American people can see what they're getting.
You know, the U.S. presidential campaigns are criticized for being too long and too expensive. And I know you're an outspoken critic of the role that big money plays in campaigns. Reform, money-wise, is not on the horizon. But this campaign season, it is definitely a shorter one due to Joe Biden's departure just last month. Do you get a sense that do you feel a national collective sigh that this campaign will only be 2 or 3 months instead of 24 months?
Well, people are certainly very sick of the long campaigns and all the money and the dark money funding the attack ads on all sides of the political spectrum. And we have our Supreme Court to thank for that, because they've struck down campaign finance reform legislation, while several of the justices are sitting on yachts with billionaires. But the American people want to get this election over with. And I think voters are more and more aware of how big money tries to influence both of the major political parties in the selection of candidates and then in their policies once they're elected.
I've got 2 questions for you to wrap things up about the state of the Republican Party and a question about the state of the American mind. The first one, Donald Trump's grip on the GOP is as strong today as it was in 2016. Will that ever change, in your opinion, or will the party end with Trump's demise?
I think that Republican voters are getting very tired of Donald Trump. Let's see how he does in this election. He may very well be poised to lose. He doesn't want to debate Kamala Harris. And he's using various strategies to avoid a debate. If he loses, I think Republican voters are finally going to realize that they've been taken by the con man from New York City who wants to pretend that he's somehow a friend of Middle America, when in fact he's rarely been to many parts of Middle America and certainly had no interest in Middle America before he became a candidate for president. So I believe the Republican Party will survive Donald Trump. I may someday return to the Republican Party, but for now, we've got Donald Trump in the driver's seat, and he's calling the shots. He's driven people out of Republican politics who don't support him. I think it's a very bad situation in the short term.
Would the Republican Party survive, in your opinion, if the next generation were led by a J.D. Vance?
Well, J.D. Vance has his own difficulties. He's embraced political extremism on a wide range of issues. Most voters who I know who want to vote Republican don't want government in people's business, telling people what to do. And if we got government telling women when they can have a child or try to regulate birth control or tell people who they can marry, all of that, the extreme right-wing social agenda that is embraced by today's Republican Party, a lot of more libertarian voters are just going to walk away from that. So there needs to be a serious discussion about whether the Republican Party truly stands for less government interference, less government regulation, or whether they just want to be a big government party advancing just a different type of big government agenda.
Let me get to the second question that I promised you about maybe the state of the American mind. There were other contenders for the vice presidential spot. They included Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro and the current U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Now, they were both white men, but Shapiro is an outspoken supporter of Israel, and Buttigieg is an openly gay man. In 2024 America, are those the qualities that still or now make you unelectable, being Jewish, being a supporter of Israel, and or being a homosexual?
No, I think, first of all, the vast majority of Americans people support Israel. We don't necessarily agree with the Israeli government, Benjamin Netanyahu, and all the policies of the Israeli government. But we've had a close relationship with Israel for many decades, and I don't see that changing at all. Those who do not believe Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state are a tiny extremist minority of the far right and the far left. So I don't think that's a problem. For Governor Shapiro, he'd only been governor of Pennsylvania, I believe, for a year and a half, and then served in the state legislature. Tim Walz had a much more extensive resume. And also, I do think, once again, it's very important to have a Midwesterner on the ticket. If you had a ticket that consisted of someone from Philadelphia, Shapiro, Governor Shapiro's from the Philadelphia area, and someone from San Francisco, I think Middle America could feel left out. Pete Buttigieg was mayor of South Bend, Indiana, but did not advance the state politics in Indiana, an ultra-conservative state in many ways. He's been a good transportation secretary, but once again, to run him for president or vice president of the United States, it really appears to be too soon. And he doesn't have a strong geographic base, including in his home state of Indiana. And with Tim Walz, on the other hand, has a very strong geographic base through the Midwest. That's not just Minnesota, but Wisconsin, Michigan. He has a lot of appeal to traditional Midwesterners. And I think that's the reason he was chosen. Americans would have no problem with having a Jewish president or vice president. And I don't think Americans will elect any president who does not support our alliance with Israel. That doesn't mean, once again, that we'll agree with the Israeli government.
Mr. Richard Painter, as always, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you. All right, let's cross now to Washington, D.C. and get the very latest from our correspondent there, Benjamin Alvarez Gruber. Benjamin, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, they've gone straight to a battleground state with their campaign today. What is at stake there?
That's right. We have been watching split screens basically for a couple of hours now, jumping from Harris-Walz campaign events to J.D. Vance rallies in the same battleground states that are, of course, very important for both parties. So it's no surprise, as political experts are saying, that it will probably be a relatively small number of voters in a handful of battleground states that will decide this election. Harris and Walz already wrapped up their campaign event in Wisconsin, are heading to Detroit in Michigan, and then will continue. They'll be in Phoenix, in Arizona, and then in Las Vegas in the state of Nevada over the next couple of days. So it's definitely a packed schedule, not only for J.D. Vance, but especially for this new duo that is trying also, of course, to use this momentum after this really packed campaign event in Philadelphia. And what's really interesting here, if we'll look at the schedule, we have J.D. Vance basically trailing this duo with dueling stops in Michigan, in Wisconsin. That's actually a political tactic. So we have Trump's VP pick in Philadelphia on Tuesday too, when Harris and Walz had their first joint appearance, and also Vance also following Harris to Detroit and also to Wisconsin, something that the Harris campaign is praising, by the way, saying that they want this split screen to provide voters in the battleground states with this split screen that will define the voters' choices in November.
Talk to me about these battleground states like Wisconsin, Michigan. What advantages does Tim Walz have connecting with voters there?
So what the campaign was trying and is trying to get, also having the governor of Minnesota on this ticket, is that he has a quite good record of appealing to the wide rural voters who have increasingly turned to Trump over the last years. Wisconsin is the neighboring state of Minnesota, where Walz is currently serving his second term as a governor. So this tour is actually aimed at shoring up support among younger voters, winning back those voters who have harshly criticized President Biden. And that's actually also something that the Trump campaign is trying to get with J.D. Vance, a senator from Ohio. That's also a state that's very important for both Democrats and also Republicans ahead of the presidential election.
Okay, our correspondent Benjamin Alvarez Gruber with the latest in Washington. Benjamin, thank you.